Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome back to the channel. Before we get this video started, I just got one question for you guys, and that is, do you like the Appa hat? Do you like seeing Appa on a beanie? Do you want to see more of Appa on a beanie? Make sure to head down there and press that subscribe button so you can see this hat more often than not. Probably only for 5 months due to it being cold, but as soon as it stops being cold, I'll stop wearing. But still, this is 5 months you do not want to miss. Call of action's over, let's get into the video. So today we are going to be talking about winter and everything that has to do with winter and reptiles. Of course, winter being the colder months of the year and reptiles being a, well, although cold-blooded species, relying on warmth to heat their bodies up, it's a bit of a contradiction. There are some things you definitely need to take into account and take certain precautions of when you do get into the colder months, making sure that your reptiles thrive through those months until it's summertime and they get the optimal time of year that reptiles do enjoy. And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today, the 5 big tips I have for you guys to make sure that your reptiles thrive through the winter months. Kicking things off, we're going to be starting with, well, the most obvious one on the list, and that is going to be number 1, supplemental heating for your reptiles. I know what you guys are thinking. Really, Dakota, give them more heat in the colder months? Yeah, no doy. Thanks, Captain Obvious. Okay, but here's the thing. Some people with many reptile keepers tend to be a little bit complacent how they're doing things. We have, well, certain reptiles, like certain reptile keepers, like to keep the on top of all their husbandry, making sure their temperatures are straight all the time, every time, and then just continue checking out throughout the year. However, you do have some hobbyists that is pretty much the exact opposite of that. They check the temperatures once every so often. Oh, looks good, good to go. And you just move on, and maybe in a couple of weeks, a couple of days, a couple of months, you decide you want to check it up again just to make sure things are going good. However, the problem is with your checking it so infrequently like those couple of months, the temperatures really seem to differ. For instance, if you're checking a temperature at around the time of, let's say, September or October, where depending on where you are in the country, well, I guess the world, I have people that are outside America, sorry, I don't mean to alienate that part of my community. You guys might check it and it's still a little bit warm and you're like, all right, good to go. But then you decide to check it again in, let's say, now, November, maybe even December, and you find, oh, wait, the temperatures are way off because the drastic outside temp difference has really declined throughout these couple of months. Now I've just realized that my basking temperature is off that 5, 10, even 15 to 20 degrees for that amount of period of time. That can't be good for the reptile. I wish I should have checked this sooner. Now that is definitely something you want to stay on top of and be very vigilant of. It's why personally for me, I actually always buy 2 sets of bulbs. I got my winter bulbs, which are the par 38, pretty much 75 watt. I believe they're in reality like 65 watt. And then I have my summer bulbs, the usually around 25, 30 watt bulbs. In the summertime, I have the 25 watts, and then when I notice that the temperature is getting just a little bit chillier, a little bit colder, checking temps, oh, those basking temps are a little bit lower than what they should be. It looks like it's time to switch out those bulbs, and that's really it. Switch out your bulbs to higher watts and you're kind of good to go. There are a multitude of different heating elements you can add to make sure your animal is getting the best that they deserve, whether that could be just a simple fix as upgrading your bulb to the next higher or the next level of wattage to make sure it's good, perhaps adding a separate bulb so you have, let's say, 160 and 125 watt, creating a larger basking zone, making sure your actual ambient temps, not only your basking temp, but the ambient temps itself are creating a good flow. There are a couple different bulbs. Of course, ceramic heat emitters are good for that, controlling the heat. However, they will dry out humidity a lot faster than your average basking bulb. That's a good tip to have in mind. Heat mats, radiant heat panels, pretty much any heating element you can think of, depending on the direct species of reptile. Of course, we were just talking about the common umbrella term of reptiles. Each one has its different specific needs, its different basking temps, its different way of getting the heating elements that you have, so play around with a little bit, and really the key thing here is making sure that even in those colder months, those basking temps are staying the same and staying at the optimum temp for your reptile to thrive. But moving on, let's get into the second topic at hand. That is going to be number 2, humidity. More humidity in the winter months. Yeah. Which is definitely a big problem when it comes to your tropical species. Of course, over here at DVCB Exotics, that's a problem with probably like 90% of my animals. I think my beardies and my leopard gecko are good, but pretty much everything else that I own needs humidity and somewhat of a higher level than just an arid temperature range. But Dakota, how do we get these humidity levels back to where they're at during the winter months? I'm glad you asked, viewer. Now there are a couple of different ways you can do this. I went a lot in depth in this video somewhere over here that I'll link, but we'll give a brief summary of what I'm doing personally right now to make sure that my tropical species reptiles are getting the humidity that will make them thrive. Number 1, and obviously going to be, well, the most obvious, that's going to be misting more often. During the summer months, especially with my geckos, I usually only have to mist once a day, usually at night, and of course the humidity drops are going to want some sort of a drop drop, it usually still retains a pretty good humidity going on. However, during the winter months, that is not the case. This little oil furnace thing I got going on that heats my room just decimates, destroys the humidity in my room and the humidity enclosures themselves. So I'm forced to mist more often, usually around 2 to 3 times a day I'm misting, just to make sure that those humidity levels stay at that proper percentage that you're going to need. A couple of different things I'm also doing is, of course, adding an actual substrate. Of course, you guys know, especially with my crested geckos, gargoyles, things like that, during breeding season, I only use paper towels. I actually switched this method after the breeding season is over back to some sort of a tropical substrate, whether that be cocoa fiber, cocoa blocks, a topsoil peat moss mix, any of those high water retention substrates where you can mist frequently, soak a little bit, they're going to retain that humidity or retain that moisture that will then evaporate into humidity, making the enclosure just a little bit more humid and will help the animal keep that humidity just a little bit longer. The little tips and tricks you can do if you are using something like an aquarium or an exoterra is seal part of the screen tops off, any screen top enclosure. Of course, screen tops in themselves, tropical species, really aren't a good idea because all that humidity is just going to go up and out of the setup. It's not a... It's kind of counterintuitive if you're putting like a gecko or something that needs humidity. It's not very good. Personally, me, I seal that. I seal most of it or some of it depending on what the humidity levels are required for that certain species. A quick, easy way is just getting some metal tape. It's real cheap on Amazon and it'll get to your house in a couple of days and just tape it on. And you're good to go. Holds the heat in a lot better, holds the humidity a lot better. All in all, it's a great method to use when you're trying to keep in humidity for your reptiles. But moving on, let's get into a little bit more of in-depth stuff. Stuff that one person might not actually think about and something that actually could save your reptile's life, and that is going to be number 3, getting a generator to make sure that your power stays on. Of course, most of you still have to remember the awful experience Texas had last year during the, I don't remember, they called it like Snowmageddon, Wintermageddon, whatever. It was during the winter months where Texas received an astronomically just strange cold front. Literally, as a personal Texan myself, living there from the ages of 6 to 18 years old, never once did it get that cold. Temperatures going in even, I almost believe, like the single digits to like 10 to 12 degrees at night. And absolutely, like, just a bizarre thing that Texas's electrical grid could not handle. Texas homes are not built to retain the cold in because it doesn't get cold over there. Of course, when that happened, it got cold, the electricity shut off. Mr. Ted Cruz did absolutely nothing for it. Good job. Good job, Ted Cruz. Incredible. What an awful man. And detrimentally, not only did people lose their lives, but a lot of reptiles lost their lives too. It was a very sad time where people were losing eggs, they were losing their seasons while python clutches, and reptiles themselves just weren't able to make it from just being that cold. And it's why I firmly believe that a generator is an absolute must for people that have a larger collection, in which case, if that does happen, you at least have some sort of sub-option to keep those lights running, even a little bit of lights, maybe congruiting all your reptiles to a single room and getting a space heater, making sure that those temps at least stay stable enough for the reptiles to survive until the lights come back on. Now, of course, it's not an option for everybody, and I completely understand that. Generators are a quite pricey thing, the cheapest coming out at somewhere around $600 to $700. Now, if you're not able to make that, you know, pretty extreme purchase for a side thing, a what if I do say, something like those lines, there is another option to do, and that is going to bring us to number 4, have a backup plan when the power goes out. But like I mentioned, generators are an expense not everyone can afford, and so it's with that case, there are some cheaper alternatives you can do. Personally for me, my backup plan involves having a mini storage unit, something that they fit all the animals that I have. Of course, here at DBC Vlogs, we have a lot of animals, quite over 100. I'm not even sure of the number. You know, we make babies, we hold back babies, we sell babies, the number fluctuates, it's like a stock market thing, whatever. We have a lot of babies, and with that, in fact, I want to make sure I have well over enough of these, you know, little travel units to make sure I can get every reptile out and into a different space, whether that be a room, whether that be the car, whether that be driving to another person's house, maybe a close friend, maybe a family member that still has their electricity on, in which case I can make sure that my reptiles thrive and not only will not thrive, but survive during that time before the power comes back on. Very great example of doing this is, again, either like snake bags, deli cups, shoebox quarts, anything like that, and stacking them into a larger tote. Something like the big black bins. I'm unsure of the actual quartage. Here's a little picture from Home Depot. These large black bins, and actually getting some Reptile shipping heat warmers. The ones that you see from like this one right here. Maybe I have some B-roll of it on hand. Those are gonna be great. Make sure, a little pro tip, do not use actual hand warmers like you get from the gas station or your Walmart, things of that nature. Those are not the same thing as Reptile shipping heat mats. The heat mats, actually the ones that are made for Reptile shipping, actually only get up to a certain degree and are meant to only go for a certain amount of time, whereas your standard hand warmer, foot warmer, things like that actually expose a very high amount of heat for a shorter period of time, which can be detrimental and even fatal to your reptiles. So just a quick tip, if you are using this method of getting a big tote, filling animals with it, then taping up some heat warmers, absolutely make sure they are the Reptile shipping ones. And then with that, it's time for the next step, and that's getting them to a safe place. Now, this really is dependent on, well, how cold is it gonna be for how long? If you are predicting a very long power outage, it being more than just a 24-hour period, I highly recommend getting your reptiles to somewhere safe, whether that be packing them up, of course, in that tote, putting them in your car, maybe like I said, mentioned earlier, driving it to a friend's house, a family member's house, if that's not available, perhaps a motel or a hotel room until that power comes back on. Now, I know, finances are tough. It's hard to justify that price for, you know, again, a what if, but it's something you really do need to keep in mind, or even have a couple of bucks set aside in case of that situation happening, because if you are left in the dark and you just have these reptiles in this cold house, granted, the New England area, I mean, our temperatures are already dropping to the 20 degrees at night, just congruently every night, 20 degrees. That's just something I don't believe you're gonna have success with if that's being prolonged for a week at a time and reptiles being subdued to that cold of temperatures that they are gonna be able to bounce back after the fact when the power turns back on. And lastly, but certainly not least, let's get into the last topic at hand, which is going to be number 5, brumation in reptiles during the colder months. Now, we cannot forget about brumation. Of course, brumation does not happen to very many species. In fact, it only happens to a select few over here at DBCB Exotics, including the plethora that we have over here. However, brumation is something not to take lightly. It's something you definitely need to prepare for. I have a couple of videos talking about brumation. I'll link one over here about bearded dragons, and then I believe I have another one about tegus as well. Pretty much those are the 2 animals in my collection that do go through brumation, and it's something you really need to keep an eye on and make sure that you're tracking well. Of course, with brumation, there is a couple things you need to keep in mind, and that, of course, the biggest one being making sure the animal has an empty gut before going through brumation. If you're constantly feeding that animal is constantly eating, you're forcing that animal to feed, maybe it's starting to go down brumation, you keep putting it up in the basking spot, spilling food at it, so it's eating that food, goes to bed with a gut full of food, that is going to lead to impaction, which is then going to lead to the detriment of that animal. You want to make sure the animal has a clear gut, no poops coming out for at least 3 to 5 days before the animal begins to go through that brumation. Of course, people are asking, you know, how do I know the science information? Of course, it's in that video. So here's a tegu one right here. I explain it a little bit more in depth on what brumation is and the signs you see before the animal goes down to it. At that point, it's pretty easy. The animal will go down. You'll provide water. You'll slowly shut off lights and shut off heating for the animal until it comes to a point where it does not need to go in brumation, and then you just put it back up. It's a pretty easy thing. Depending on what species you have, it can last 4 to 6 weeks. It can last like 4 to 5 months. It really depends. And that's about it for brumation. Just keep an eye on it. It is very important. While it is a pretty simple task to do, some people might oversight it, especially for some of you with a larger collection. You gotta make sure you're vigilant on that. Make sure that the animals go through brumation, have a nice safe brumation, and acclimate out of brumation healthily and are all good for every year that they go through it. And there you have it, folks. 5 things you need to know about reptiles in winter, or whatever I named the title. It's a work in progress. I'm not sure yet. I'll think of one when the time comes. This is gonna do it for another episode of DBCB Exotics. If you guys wanna check me out in some more places, or perhaps buy an animal from me, you can check me out over at Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Facebook and Instagram is where you can get the reptiles from me, message me, things of that nature. Then, of course, as always, we have Patreon, patreon.com/DBCB Exotics. This is where you get the up-to-date info about everything that's going on within my breeding business, DBCB Exotics. This includes a plethora of breeding products I have going on: the New Caledonian geckos, tokay geckos, cave geckos, ball pythons, some monitor lizard side actions, everything that's going on, tegus including. For everything that is, you get the up-to-date stuff, you get info when new projects are going on, when babies are produced, you even have tiers that have first dibs on the babies before anyone else gets to get them in the public. Now, it's all well and good. It starts as low as $1 a month. If you want some more information about that or potentially join Patreon, you can find that information down there in the link in the description below. And as always, folks, thank you so much for taking the time in your day to follow me here at DVCB Exotics. We'll see you next time, but until then, goodbye.